So when the Secretary of Education, who's not a friend right now to the program, who's trying to create a lot of regulations, parents are pushing back. They're saying no way. And the same thing's happening in Florida. And so when it becomes self-regulated by the families who are using it, that's what we're looking for. And maybe then you don't need the professional advocates anymore.
Hello. Welcome again to another episode in the Let People Prosper Show. My name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today we're going to have a great discussion about education, school choice, the direction where that's going, and really how to let students, teachers, and everyone prosper. And it's none other than Robert Enlow. Robert, welcome to the Let People Prosper Show.
Thanks for having me, Vance. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, same here. Really am. And I've been following your work for a long time and the work that y'all been doing, and just excited to have you on the program today. But before we get going too far, let me go ahead and give your bio for the audience, and then we'll jump right into it. So Robert C. Enlow is the president and CEO of EdChoice. Before the formation of EdChoice in 2016, he was an integral part of the Milton and Rose Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice from its launch in 1996. He served as a fundraiser, projects coordinator, vice president, and executive director before being named president and CEO of the foundation in 2009. Robert attended Oxford University through the Oxford Center for Mission Studies, where he studied theology. He received his bachelor's from Seattle Pacific University. Robert lives in Indianapolis and has 2 children. So, with all that great background and everything, and I want to dig into some of that in here a little bit, but let me go ahead and ask you the first question I do all the guests. Why do you do what you do every day?
That's a great question, and I think the answer to that is simple. I got lucky. I got born. I got
nice.
I got born into a family in Evansville, Indiana, that owned a daily morning newspaper, that owned a bank for a long time. That I just got born into that environment and was afforded some educational options that I didn't deserve or merit, but by the fact that my family could afford them. So my mother was able to move to a neighborhood with a new public elementary school. That worked great. And then when I became, as she says, vital, she was able to pack me off to a boarding school in Long Island, right? So these are opportunities that I was receiving. And when I got to the school in Long Island, which I will forever be grateful for, the Stony Brook School, it's a great school. I didn't see a lot of diversity there. I didn't see a lot of people of different color there. And so I was wondering, why am I affording this and why are not everyone else having that same access? So from that early age, going way, way back, I'm like, there's something wrong with the way we are constructing our system of educational opportunities and education in America. And when you assign a child's future based on where their parents live, that is an unacceptable problem for me in a society that's supposed to be free. There's no way we can prosper if we allow that to happen. So I basically ended up dedicating my life to that principle of trying to upend the structure of education as we know it.
Yeah, awesome. And so the Friedman Foundation, Rose and Milton Friedman Foundation for Educational Opportunity, that started in 96.
That's right. Yeah. So, and I had just moved back from England. I had no idea who Milton Friedman was. I didn't know who Milton Friedman was. I mean, I was doing liberation theology, for goodness sakes. And, I was kind of a lefty, as you might imagine.
Yeah.
And so I get this opportunity again, just by virtue of luck, I get this opportunity and I get this job with Milton Friedman's Legacy Foundation. And, 30 years on, I'm just proof that if you stay around and put hard work in, they'll put anyone in charge.
That's right. And at that time, because Milton Friedman didn't die until 2006.
That's right.
So you were able to be around him some?
Yeah, I got to know him in the last decade of his life, and particularly the last 5 years. It was amazing. Once you break through the, you're not just some young punk from some radical lefty, right? It was amazing to watch him, and frankly, him and Rose. I don't think people realize Rose and he were a partnership that were at that time, they were together longer than the average lifespan of a man. Right. Yeah. And so when they were together that long, they were so incredible. She was just as smart as he was. Yeah. And so, it was a great and humbling experience. I feel like their book, Two Lucky People.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. One of these books over here that I have sitting is Free to Choose by Rose Milton Friedman. I mean, Milton Friedman's my favorite economist and has been for a long time. But the first book that really got me going towards, because Robert, I don't know if you know a whole lot about me, but growing up, I grew up pretty low income, single mom. My parents got divorced when I was young. I went to a private school from kindergarten to second grade. a public school, government school from 3rd grade to 6th grade. It could be moving around. And then from 7th grade through 12th grade, I went to homeschool. Well, during that time, I started playing drums. So I'm a drummer and played in a hard rock band for about 4 years. And we had black hair and 10 gauge earrings in my ears and everything. And anyway, it was mosh pits. It was a lot of fun. And I got in a really bad car accident in 2002 when I was 20. And that's kind of changed my life in a different direction where I feel like I got this calling of let people prosper. But I say all that for one thing to mention that I went through school choice and had opportunities, not because of our income, but because of just different situations. My mom worked at that private school. And so I had that opportunity. But the thing that kind of set me off whenever I was in that rock star years, more the liberal side of me, I guess, progressive side, was I read Capitalism and Freedom. And that one really changed the direction of my thinking and everything else. And so part of school choice, monetarism, all the stuff that Milton Friedman did, I mean, it's remarkable that you're able to spend some time with them. I never had that opportunity.
I never thought I would. And the people I've been able to meet as a result have been incredible, from, presidents to secretaries of education. It's been lucky and incredible. And like you, I was raised by a single mother, so I get it. I understand. Milton was able to take the hardest and most complicated topics and make it very simple. Like one of my favorite, most pithy sayings he has is, if you put the government in charge of the desert, there'd be a shortage of sand in a few years. What struck me about Dr. Friedman was his passion. He believed in the free market and individualism in order to improve the quality of life for everyone. And he really didn't I'll never forget, he said two quotes that really get me are that one is, the tragedy and irony is the very system set up to create a common set of values, to create a common set of education, should in fact exacerbate the stratification of society. And he's talking about public schooling there, right? The idea that our public schools, while set up to create a common good, is in fact breaking that apart, stratifying our society. And I couldn't agree more. And then the second one is, when he was talking about choice, people would say, oh, well, poor people won't be able to choose. And he would always be confronted with that reality, that conversation. And his argument was, that's a gratuitous insult, he said. He said that basically there's poor people throughout history have demonstrated their willingness to sacrifice wisely for their children. So give them that opportunity now. So this concept of free markets, Milton believed would benefit those who have the least most.
Wow. Awesome. I didn't intend to go that direction, but it was good. I mean, all the background and everything else with Friedman and other things with EdChoice changed over to EdChoice in 2016.
2016, yep.
And now, I mean, you've got are you in every state? Like, do you have someone in every state?
Well, we don't have someone in every state. We have someone covering every state. Yeah, we have someone who covers every state. But, there are 15 states that don't have school choice right now that we look at. Of those states, 14 or 13 are trifecta Democrat. And so, we've done a lot of work in the red states, and now the conversation starts shifting to the blue states.
Yeah.
With the outliers being Kentucky and Nebraska. Okay.
We need to get them on board.
It'll be a while, but we're working.
Yeah. One step at a time. Yeah. And look, if kind of look back over time, and this has been a long slog. I mean, you've been a part of this now for 30 years, part of this quote unquote movement. And it's been fascinating to see what's happened just over the last couple of years.
Yep.
Maybe you might take us through some of those numbers.
I would love that. So first of all, EdChoice is when we started in 1996 with Milton Friedman, no one was talking about school choice. So I liken us to go back to my more progressive days. To sort of we like to turn the volume up to 11. So our picture. So we're going to turn it up to 11. It was Spinal Tap, I mean. And we did. In 96, we turned the volume up to 11. No one was talking about school choice. Our goal was just to educate the public, get a bunch of bills, see bills passed, right? Just any old bill will do. And we realized in 2014 and 15 that wasn't no longer going to work. You can't just have any bill. Milton Friedman stood for universal choice and universal eligibility. So in 2016, we started shifting our name, and then we shifted our focus not to just any choice, but to real universal choice. And so we started with, I think, 12 states on our targets in 2016. And you'll know these states: Florida, Arizona, West Virginia, New Hampshire, North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, which finally is getting there, Mississippi, which we failed in, Idaho, Montana. So these states that we've been focusing on, Indiana, Ohio, have created universal choice. And so in 16, we turned the volume up to 11 again. right? This concept of like got to be universal. Now the question is, with the pandemic, so all this progress had been made, Vance, right? And it was happening slow, right? We went from zero, like having a low income choice to choice for 300% of free and reduced price lunch to 400%. We were making this growth. It was slower, but it was going. The pandemic comes along and supercharged this movement with parents, right? And so we have decided to turn the volume up to 11 again. And not just say that any choice is okay. Not just say that universal eligibility is okay. We're not just trying to say we passed a bill with universal eligibility, but only $1 billion like Texas, which I'm sure we'll talk about, right? We want to make sure that when every child has a real choice, they have a real dollar to go to all the options. And so there are really right now only 5 states that have that. And so I'm happy to talk about those.
And New Hampshire was the latest, right?
New Hampshire was the latest. So you have Arizona, Arkansas, Florida, and West Virginia, and now New Hampshire. We've been working in New Hampshire for a long time. EdChoice and our local partners up there with Kate Baker and AFP and a few others have been really leading the way for the longest time there. And we're excited by the work we've been doing, and we're excited for them. Everyone now, basically, it's just if you have a choice, you have $1, and you can go wherever you want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's fascinating too to kind of hear you describe the changes that were made. And I didn't really know exactly what was always going on. I was like, oh man, they're getting rid of Friedman name in there. But I think it makes sense the way you put that there was not only a little bit of a vision redirection, but you needed something to help qualify that. And I guess that was part of the name change.
That's right. Yeah. So we changed our name in order to be more aggressive on Milton's idea, and B, to honor Milton and Rose's legacy. You know, they always used to say that the progenitors of the Ford Foundation and all these big Carnegie foundations would be rolling over in their grave if they knew what these foundations were doing with their legacy and their funds. And so Milton always had this idea that if we weren't going to sunset, we needed to make sure his name was taken off, just not because of any issue with us, but just because his argument was the ideas have to outlive my name.
Yeah.
Now we're very lucky to have David, his son, as a member of a board member. We're very excited, and we're actually living that legacy, I think, even more so now. Because when Milton was alive, and rightfully so, he said, never talk in my name, and I never did, right? and I still don't, but I also aggressively could pursue his ideas more now, which we do. Right.
Yeah.
And as you've seen from our Friedman Index, we're doing that right now.
Yeah. And I want to get into that. And just sticking with Friedman for a second. Now, because in Capitalism and Freedom, he talked a lot about school choice, free to choose. There was school choice. And he's kind of known as the father of school choice. But were there any other big advocates or folks who were talking about this before this was coming out in the 50s and 60s?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, the early advocates, I mean, he would go back and say, I'm not an advocate. I'm following John Stewart, not John Mill. He's following Thomas Paine. I'm following the whole tradition of classical liberalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he would say that. Now, he was the first one in the 50s to talk about it. But the modern movement, when it really got launched in the early 90s, it was a very interesting movement. And so you had Milton Friedman, John Walton, who was an amazing leader in this. You had Howard Fuller, Susan Mitchell early on. You had these people who were on the ground in Milwaukee. You had David Brennan. And you had people who were just basically trying to make these ideas come alive. And Milton Friedman was somewhat the impetus, but then really the impetus in Milwaukee, as Howard Fuller will say, is, you know, Black kids weren't getting enough education, and we were trying to start a Black-run, Black-led school district, and the closest we could get was vouchers. And, you know, so there's a lot of early, and that early history around sort of the Milton versus the low income was always there. But it, you know, I would argue that the Milton vision is winning out because I frankly think the Milton vision is more empowering for families of color and for families who are poor.
Yeah, I totally agree. I wonder too what you think about this, Robert, before we get into some more of the details is, you know, Milton Friedman, there's a lot of talk about school vouchers, and the word voucher is used kind of derogatory now. I mean, in Texas, when we were dealing with this for a while, and I know you've seen this in other states, they call it vouchers. The Democrats all call it vouchers because they think it's bad. And Milton Friedman talked about it in school vouchers and talked about it in such a way that I think was good for that time. But the more that I've read into his writings, I actually think that his insight was much broader, very much more similar to ESAs, education savings accounts, than the vouchers. It's just that that's the term that he used at that point in time, where you have dollars going from one institution to another institution versus the real flexibility, the real freedom, to your point, is for the individuals, the parents, to have the money to send their kids to where you want to go.
Correct.
Is that the way you see it as well?
100%. In fact,
Okay.
Milton Friedman was the first one, in my opinion, to come up with the idea of ESAs. He said, but why stop there? Why not offer? And he said, divisible vouchers.
Yeah.
Where you could spend, look, the voucher terminology is just the only terminology they had at the time, right? I say you could call them pink elephants, right? The argument is you have to separate the government financing of education from the government running of schools. How you do that is merely a mechanism. At the time, vouchers were the only mechanism we knew. Now there's tons of different mechanisms, and that's great. That means the market is responding. And so Milton, I think, foresaw ESAs. I think ESAs are definitely the way to go. You need to, and our mantra nowadays on our Turning Up to 11 is all kids, all dollars, all options, right? It just can't be only private schools. We love our private school friends, but Milton used to tell me this. Sorry, this is gonna be a digression if you don't mind, but
go for it.
This joke, this story once. He goes, imagine if he told me this. All the hot dog stands in New York City were immediately put under government control on one day. And you would only be able to go to the one they told you to. You would be forced to go. It would be free at the point of delivery, and you'd be signed, right? So he goes, what would happen to all the other hot dog vendors in the city? And I'm like, I had no idea. I was a young, stupid guy.
Yeah.
And he goes, well, there'd be a bunch of high-end ones up in the Upper East Side and kosher hot dog stands. And he's like, think about private schooling in some ways like that. Right. So private schooling has been a response to a government-run monopoly. And we're just beginning to see what a true free marketplace can look like in education. Arizona is the perfect example of that.
Yeah. No, it's fantastic. And it's just been phenomenal to see just the expansion over time. Because how many states now have some form of a school choice program?
36 states, DC, and Puerto Rico.
Yep. And so more than the majority of states now have that.
And 19 states, or 18 or 19, depending on how I count, have universal eligibility programs.
Okay.
Great.
And then the 5 are the ones that were truly universal. If you think about, like you said, all students, all options, all dollars.
Yes, that's right. So if you're like, let me give you an example. In my beautiful home state of Indiana, we now have all kids can get a voucher. And they can get all the dollars. They get percentage of the dollars, all the available dollars that is set aside for them. So if they have a choice, they have dollars, but they can only choose private schools. So they would get 2 out of 3 check marks for us.
Yeah.
Iowa allows for the same thing. It says all kids and has all dollars, but their ESA is a private school enrollment one, so it doesn't have all options. Let's say you look at Utah. Utah is a great program. It allows all kids and all the options. They can choose anything they want, but they only cap it at like $150 or $200 million. That's barely enough.
Yeah.
Or in Texas,
you're
going to allow all kids, but it's really going to be limited to a number of options. And they're only giving $1 billion. $1 billion, as you know, is like what, 1% of what they spend? Barely, just 1%.
Very small.
Percent of what they spend on K-12 education. So it's choice, but it's not really universal choice.
Yeah, I know. And I love this. And so this is going back to the EdChoice Freeman Index for 2025. We've got Florida has the highest index score of 77, with 100% in students eligible for school choice programs, 77% of the award per choice student versus what the state and local per pupil dollars are. So that's pretty high, 77%. And then, yes, they have multiple use for school choice programs. It'd be interesting to see what happens in Texas, because you're right. Texas passed this year Senate Bill 2, which took a number of years. And I mean, I've been working on this, Robert, in Texas for about a decade. Not as long as you, but for a long time. And it's great to see this happen. But there have been some of these limitations. One of those being the $1 billion that you mentioned, which is a small amount. There's going to be about $10,000, which is I think it was about 80% of the school M&O amount that was going to the students. So 80% sounds pretty good. So if you just divide those two together, you get about 100,000 students. I think that's a maximum. It's probably closer to 85,000.
We estimated 92 to 96,000.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. And then out of that, you've got 6.3 million school-age students across Texas. 5.5 million are in government schools, public schools. The rest are in private school, homeschool, and other things. So the 80 something or 100,000 divided by the 6.3 million is only 1.5%, or even maybe lower than that. The maximum 1.5% of students would be able to access it.
Yep.
And that was kind of my pushback of what was even happening in Texas is like, look, and on top of that, Robert, is that they gave $8 billion more. Actually, it's $8.5 billion is what it ended up being to government schools. And so what I've seen sometimes, and I don't know if you've seen this in other states, but in some of the states I've seen, especially in Texas, and that's where I live and saw it most recently, is it's almost like this buyout. Like we're gonna pay you off the school district portion, the government schools, to get a little bit of school choice, and hopefully that will expand.
Sure.
But one of the other concerns I have about this is what we just saw in Louisiana. Louisiana expanded. They had a large number of people that applied. And then they came back in this session and didn't fund the additional amount. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that, though. Like, how should we start thinking about this?
So the theory of action for such a long time, Vance, I really appreciate you've encapsulated the arguments very well. But the theory of action for a long time has been, well, if we just get choice in the door, people will demand it, it will grow, it will be bigger and better. And for the most part, that has been genuinely true, right?
Yeah.
The problem is along the way, you begin to regulate it. You begin to prioritize it. You begin to put hamstrings on it, right? And so as a result of that, you grow, but you go in a very sort of regulated monopoly. The terminology we use is institutional isomorphism, right? Now, what that means is it's the tendency of, over time, of institutions to morph into one thing. Right? And so what ends up happening is our even our own side will say, yeah, well, it's okay if we take tests. No, it's okay if we do this reporting. Oh, it's okay if we only allow accredited private schools. Oh, it's okay if we have more regulations. And we say that's not the way to create a free market. So the key thing in places like Texas is there's lots of opportunity, but there's also going to be lots of pitfalls. You know, excuse me. The three things we don't like about the Texas bill, right? One, it's not dollars following kids. It's $1 billion appropriation, which they're going to have to fight for every time. Two, they limited the number of private school, the way that private schools can get in and the way that vendors can get in. Three, they also didn't fund the homeschoolers at a high enough amount. I think it could have done more than that.
Yeah. That was at $2,000.
And four, people don't realize it's really hard to implement these programs.
Yeah.
I mean, you create a bunch of prioritization and a bunch of bells and whistles and hoops to jump through. It's just going to make it really hard. And so I think that requires vigilance among the advocates and vigilance among the parents. And so, look, I think it's going to be a really good effort. There's going to be a lot of, the whole goal is to get people oversigned, that there's more than 100,000 families.
Yeah.
But be careful what you wish for, because the minute you do, you're going to have people who have to go through the prioritization issue. Right. And that's fine. We special needs kids, lower income families. So it's just going to potentially be some issues in the state of Texas. And we see this all the way across the board. This is why it's much cleaner in a place like Indiana. You got a choice. You got dollars. Just figure it out.
Yeah. And two, thank you for bringing all those points up too, because I think that's really important about the steps that it takes. Because one of the things too, like in Texas, is that we were hearing, well, look, we got to start small so that way we can grow. I kept saying, well, why don't we look to Arizona? Why don't we look to Florida? There are examples that we could use to get things started now. But I know that there's also administrative costs and the transaction costs that happen in the meantime that maybe we do need to build out. So I'm going to keep fighting hard, as I know you will. Yeah. But as we grab the audience's attention of what maybe to do, but not to do to get it right, what do you think about like Arizona? I mean, Arizona it seemed like they were the first ones to get things going and moving in this direction. And it just seems like there's so much that they're doing right. But what do you think about what's happening in Arizona?
So I love what's happening in Arizona. A lot of states like Texas and others are using Arizona as, oh my gosh, it's a cautionary tale. They're going to go budget broke. By the way, that's just not true.
No.
Right? If it were true, then why would the Secretary of Education in Arizona, who actually manages the program, say we have a budget surplus?
Yeah.
Clearly, you're not busting the bank if they have a budget surplus, right? So, opponents will just lie about this stuff. But what Arizona is getting right is it really is a vibrant marketplace. So we just did this study called the supply side of ESAs. We at EdChoice are going to take the lead in trying to find out how these programs are being utilized. And what we found in Arizona, in 1 year when they went universal, they grew from 510 private schools to 661 in the program.
Wow.
Those are new efforts. They grew from almost over 1,000 new vendors, right? So what they're doing is they're creating a true marketplace of options.
Yeah.
Means, which is really important, is they're working me out of a job. All right, which is the right thing. I don't want to be an advocate that says I got a job for life. There are lots of organizations who believe that, not mine, right? And in Arizona, what's happening now is the parents are defending their own program. So when the Secretary of Education, who's not a friend right now to the program, who's trying to create a lot of regulations, parents are pushing back. They're saying no way. And the same thing's happening in Florida. And so when it becomes self-regulated by the families who are using it, that's what we're looking for. And maybe then you don't need the professional advocates anymore.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. I love that. And I wonder too, you know, if we're taking a step back and thinking about like, what is the best system overall, you know, and I do a lot of work on school finance and in fiscal policy. I mean, you have to when you're working on the state budgets. I mean, that's a large part of their budget. And I wrote a book, it's been about a decade ago now, with Kent Grusendorf and Talmadge Heflin on basically Texas School Finance 101. And we went through all these different pieces. And, we have our property tax that funds part of the schools, and we have the state's spending on the school finance formulas, mainly through sales taxes, and it puts all this money in there. It's about $100 billion a year. We're funding, the latest numbers show, about $18,000 per student in Texas. When you look at total funds, all funds. And when you do that, one of the things that I've been trying to figure out is, and I've been working on this some with Representative Brian Harrison here in Texas, but how do you get each one of the dollars out there? So if we were to take the $100 billion of $18,000 per kid and have a $12,000 ESA instead of the 5.5 million kids in the public school system today to 6.3 and give them all $12,000 ESAs, it would actually only be $75 billion. Yeah. We could save $25 billion a year to get true universal school choice.
Correct.
But that means that the dollars that aren't going towards the public schools should go towards the ESAs. However, what I'm seeing, at least in Texas, and correct me if I'm wrong in other states, but there's been two parallel tracks. They're trying to grow the beast, in my view, the monopoly government school system, while also trying to add competition. And that's difficult. No matter which market you're in, if you still keep feeding the beast, it's tough to beat him. And so I wonder what those kind of trade-offs are for you.
So that's a great question. First of all, you're bringing up property tax, and that is a ginormous Texas issue for many, many years. Look, it's also a ginormous issue for everyone, right?
Yeah.
So most choice and voucher and ESA programs draw, in fact, and if not almost all of them, only draw from portions of the state funds, right? And private schools sometimes get federal funds through various programs, but there's no access to property tax funds. And frankly, that's a legitimate question, right? So we have this issue in Indiana. We're probably the most progressive on using property tax for choice. For our charter schools, we just allowed property tax referendum sharing, which is a big deal, right? But you can't encumber property taxes that are used for debt. Right. So it's a really complex issue, right? When you talk property tax. Now, when you come to feeding the beast, the problem is the beast in America, you now have more non-teachers than teachers in the beast. Right. And so as a percentage of the total, there are more non-teachers than teachers. And so that creates a real problem. Lots of central offices.
Yes.
Here's why I think choice works the best way. It's the lever. And I appreciate the funding. And every state that has had school choice has seen an increase in public school funding. But when you create true radical choice, now what I mean by that is it's not just private school choice. It's robust charters. It's robust homeschooling freedoms. It's robust interdistrict enrollment. It's robust open enrollment across districts. Like when you do that, you create real challenges for these districts that are failing. So in a place like Indiana, in our urban core, Indianapolis public schools, only 30% of the kids attend their assigned school now.
Wow.
And in the city at large, I think just over 50%, I believe.
Wow.
Right. So this competition over time, when you create a robust marketplace of options and you give parents what they want. Look, parents are asking for public schools, charter schools, private schools, homeschools. So my ultimate goal is we do this poll where we ask, what would you like to do? We go to public school, private school, charter school, at home, whatever. When we match those percentages to what the options are in the state, I'll argue we've been successful.
Yeah.
And that's happening in Indiana, even though that we've given more and more money. And districts are going to have to come to the fact that they better compete or die, really. I mean, it's a long way to say it, but I mean, they better reform. And the things that they have to reform are their buildings, their grounds, and the way they do their staffing. Right.
Yes.
It's just the reality of it, right? They can't continue having mega schools with lots of maintenance that are old, and then try to use property tax to cover all those problems. No business would ever do that. And I think the more choice you have, for step one, robust choice across the state. Step two, make sure that's implemented well. And step three, then you'll begin to see this question about how to fix property tax and how to fund kids.
Nice. Yes. I love it. And I think we talked about some of the pitfalls or things that you could look at, but I mean, look, I'm a huge supporter of school choice. I mean, I believe in market competition, just like you were saying there. I do believe that it will improve public schools. And that's what the research has shown, is that when you add competition, you're changing the incentives such that they need to improve their quality to keep customers, keep students. And some people don't like that, but look, I mean, it's a service that's being provided. If you look about it from the other side of the market, on the teaching side, they have a monopsony situation because about 90+ percent of teachers are hired or employed by the public school systems. And that gives the public school system a lot of power on salary schedules, on benefits, and a whole bunch of other things that I also believe that not only will he improve public schools and the quality of them, but will improve the quality of life for teachers.
Yep.
I mean, I'm one of those, Robert, where I really think that quality teachers should be paid a lot more than they are today.
So let me blow your socks away. We do EdChoice started in 2020. We just decided in January to start. Let's do a monthly poll this year and see what happens, right?
Yeah.
And next thing I know, 5 years on, we have been polling parents every single month for the last 5 years. So we have, since COVID, the largest database of parent information about schools and school choice. And along the way, every year, every quarter, we've done teachers. And so our latest teacher poll blew me away. We ask a question. It's a cold question. We say, do you support ESAs? Do you support vouchers? Right? Straight up, right? Teachers, just cold, support ESAs at 60%.
Wow.
The general public supports ESAs at 40% cold. No more for 48%. Obviously, when you explain it, teachers go up to 76% support.
Yeah.
The reality is teachers are the ones that are wanting more options. That's why they're the ones starting these micro schools. That's why they're the ones trying to get out of the system that's not working for them. And you know, we talk a lot about, and that's because they're frustrated. Teachers were super frustrated because we say, oh, schools are accountable, right? Okay, well, let's take a look at the accountability in our traditional schools. They say they're financially accountable. That's just rubbish. We know that, right? All they do is check a box to say they spent money. People say that ESAs are not very accountable, but I say I can tell you every second of every day where every single dollar is going in the Arizona ESA program. You may not like where it's going, but I can tell you where it's going. You can't do that in public schools.
No.
They say public schools are democratically accountable. Well, what percentage of the state in Texas votes in school board elections? Probably pretty low, right?
Yes.
It's hard to say they're democratically accountable. And then they say, well, they're academically accountable. That's you laugh, and so does everyone else in the world, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, when we talk about choice, and teachers see that, right? They see all of that. That's it. And they want the ability to try and really teach kids. And choice is giving them that opportunity. So I'm excited about what's going to happen with teachers.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, you get these points that they bring up about their teaching to the test, and there are all these rules and regulations. And it kind of makes me upset sometimes where some people will say, well, yeah, but we need those same restrictions on private schools. Or why would we take a bad system and then push it over to somewhere else? I don't understand that.
That is 100% the exact right point to make. Like, why would I want to foist the worst system we've had in a long time that is proven to not actually increase academic outcomes from the schools that are actually providing academic outcomes?
Right, exactly. What's also, I think, remarkable about the revolution of school choice and the movement and everything else is that from an economist's perspective, you actually see prices. I mean, we know how much we spend on education in this country for public schools, but we don't really know the price.
Correct.
And so when you start having the allocation and the exchanges between parents and students on one side and teachers and administrators on the other side, and they are coming to exchange, we can actually determine what the prices are.
So
because I think $18,000 is way too much. I mean, I think we're spending too much on education today.
Well, we can get into the real conversation about monopolist rent, right? So that's the economic term. But one of the in real life, here's what's happening. In Arizona, because they're so robust with choice, my partner's girls go to this place called Eagle Ridge, which is a public run ESA program.
Wow.
So they have in and out, they have homeschooling kids that will go 2 or 3 days a week, and they create contracts and they fund it through the ESA, but it's run by Mesa Public Schools.
Wow.
Shocking. You can cost out what the courses are and how much a half day is, right? So when you create more opportunities through ESAs, you're going to have public schools learn to cost it out. And they will. They'll have to. By the way, we do this in colleges, right? How much does a course credit cost? Well, you know.
Oh, right.
Credit cost, right? So you could do the same thing in traditional schools.
Yeah, exactly. And then you can compete because then you can look around and see who else is charging what along the way.
Yep.
What about this, Robert, about there's some discussion right now among the one big beautiful bill up in Congress, and there's a part of that on the tax side that would allow for more tax credit scholarships for private school, and there's some discussion out there about we need a federal program and everything else, and I happen to be pretty concerned about that. I'd rather the federal government just get out of it entirely and leave it to the states, but I wonder, as someone who's in this every day, like what are you thinking about that?
Well, if you got to know me a little bit, I see the good and the bad, right? So, I see the bad of it. I'm, the Reagan quote, I'm from the federal government, I'm here to help, which is when you should run away. But look, the fact is I think what's in front of Congress right now, the sort of ECHA, the Educational Choice Charitable Act, is probably the best outside of a direct refundable tax credit to families. It's probably the best option you're ever going to have, right? It's the Senate version is a $4 billion annual forever appropriation that will allow tax credits and allow families to choose. And so I think it'll really help in blue states, right? Because as I said, there are 15 states that are most on blue. You're not getting choice in those states. So I think it could be helpful. Again, though, you don't want the federal government to take over what's a state activity. And you don't want the program that's passed to hurt and harm the existing programs in existing states. And you don't want them to not be parent friendly. And so, again, is it better that it's at Treasury than Department of Education? Yes. But that doesn't mean the rules won't be fomented and won't be created and issues like that. So look, be very hesitant, right? To quote, was it Bugs Bunny? Be very, very careful, right? Elmer Fudd. So, but you need to be very, very careful, right?
Trust but verify along the way.
Trust but verify. But what I like about the current proposal, that it will allow a robust marketplace of SGOs to be created that basically could allow for an entire private sector marketplace, which I love.
Interesting. Yeah.
Right. So you have tax credits that can come in and the SGO becomes ostensibly its own school system, which I love.
Yeah. Interesting. Now, good points there. Give me something to chew on for a while.
If it's the federal government, we should always be careful because people think, oh, well, we'll pass a bill that's bulletproof because, we got the people in charge that can do that. And they forget that 10 years from now, the entire opposite party will be in charge.
Right. Because I hear a lot about, the Indiana Department of Education, which I love. I don't think there's a constitutional role for the federal government to be involved in education. That's just right. And I know you're on board with that. But so how do we actually do that? If we close the Department of Education, are they just going to move the funding to other places and still have a lot of the rules,
They will. So look, I'm always a big fan of function, not form. Okay. There are key functions of the Department of Education that have to keep going. Yeah. So special ed funding, it has to keep going. That is an appropriate federal law that we should keep up. Civil rights, we should be careful of that. Yeah. Does that need to be housed in Department of Justice or Department of Education? Title I funding, does that have to be so funding these programs and keep them going is one thing. Running them through the department is just formality to me. The one thing I will say, though, that we were frustrated by and upset by, frankly, is in 1866 or 67, when they passed the first Department of Education bill federally, right? That was created in 1867. It was to report on the condition, collect statistics and data to report on the condition of education, right? And the thing that the administration gutted immediately was all the data centers. And we think that's a bad idea. Yeah. I think it's important. Not that you go create a bunch of new data and a bunch of regulations, but there's tons of data there that needs to be reviewed and seen through. And so that's where we understand how schools are doing, how private schools are doing. So, I wish and hope they get back to putting the data nerds back in charge. Yeah.
Well, that's a great point. Cause data in this sense are the prices, they're the signals that are telling us what's working and what's not working across the country. And if you don't have that, then you're losing access to those signals.
That's great. I mean, Milton would say the following: if you have a real marketplace, you have to have consumers armed with demand, consumer power to do supply that's free to enter the marketplace and try new things, and good quality information.
Yeah. Yep. Well, as we're closing this up, and man, we should talk about this some more because I love talking about this stuff. Where do you see us heading? And where do you hope that we will be? Because I hope that through all of this, we're going to see a lot more innovation. Like, I don't even know what the schooling system, quote unquote, system is going to look like across the country, because I believe that so many more things are going to pop up with AI and all this other stuff going on, that it's going to allow for so much more innovation than this monopoly old system that we have today. But I wonder, somebody who's doing this each and every day like you are, where do you think the future is going to be?
Oh, that's a great question. And I have three visions. There are three visions that I see out here right now. One is, and here's another movie reference, one is Idiocracy. We'll end up being just dumb as all two short planks. And it doesn't matter what we've done, because we've allowed this existing system to continue to be in charge. And so I'm really worried that we're going to end up down this sort of idiocracy pathway. The second is that we're sputtering along. Like in the Batman movie, keep breath references, right? The original one with Ra's al Ghul, where he says, we tried a new thing, economics, and Gotham sputtered along, right? I'm worried that education will just sputter along, even with a choice, because we're not really doing something robust enough. We're not really changing the system enough. But, there'll be enough choices. There'll still be about 10% to 12% of people choosing, right? That's great. And that's fantastic. And that's better for those 10 to 20%. But it's not real reform. And then the real vision, which I'm really hopeful for, is the one where we do see a delivery system that's different. People ask me all the time, well, Robert, you've been in this movement for so long, which I'm like, really? I'm not that old. What do you see the vision of the future? And I say, well, the vision for me is, if we're 25 years from now, we're delivering education in the same way we're delivering it today, we've failed.
Yeah.
And so to me, we have to allow for a bunch more risk taking, a bunch more new entrants in the marketplace, customization. And as parents begin to get more and more savvy, they'll make more and more choices. And so, look, for me, it's a vision of, we can keep down the path of becoming idiocracy. We can keep sputtering along, or we can truly try to create the system we're looking for. And I'm hopeful that we'll get to the end, to the right end, which is the one of options. I think that depends on what the vision is, and do all the advocates in this movement. We know where the opponents stand. It's super clear where the opponents stand. No choice, only government. The question is, do the advocates actually see that vision? Do they want to see that North Star? Or is it just about passing bills, getting butts in seats, and trying to make those who help support them happy? Right? To me, the goal is a free market. It's not, and my customer is families. My customer is not legislators. And I think that's important for all of us to think about. And if you put your customers parents, you're going to have a robust marketplace.
Put customers first.
Yes, sir.
Right? I love it, man. Well, hey, I really appreciate all the work that you've done and being on the program today. And I look forward to working together and trying to keep pushing this movement, because when people ask me, like, what's the best way to let people prosper, I usually start with education choice. Like, I think that, to me, if you don't have a good education and we don't have a system that's educating the future of the bright young minds of tomorrow, that we're not going to be as fruitful materially, psychologically, spiritually, or anything else. And so I really believe that this is the front lines for the big next revolution that we're going to have.
Well, and that's why I would encourage all your listeners to go out and, like the Jennifer of the Catholic Conference is going directly into schools to try and get this program implemented in Texas. A place like Families Empowered and Colleen Dipper going straight to parents and talking to them. Those two organizations and are really trying to change who controls the narrative. And so your listeners should go and work with those guys on getting this bill implemented the right way.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for being on the Let People Prosper show, and God bless you and your family.
Thanks very much. Appreciate you too.
Thanks, Robert. Well, for the audience, thank y'all for joining us today. Hopefully it gives you a little bit better glimpse about what's happening in the education system, the school choice movement, and so much more. I'll put all this at the show notes at vanceginn.com or my Substack newsletter, vanceginn.substack.com. And be sure to check this stuff out. I think this is something that we can play a role in improving the lives of kids and the future of America and hopefully the world. So until next time, God bless you and let people prosper.